All right, good afternoon, comrades. As per our program, we are having a session on the Connective Party strategy and left projects in Europe, with the focus on Syriza, Podemos, and Die Linke in Germany. What lessons can be learned? We are fortunate to have with us Mario Candeias from the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation in Berlin. Mario has been doing critical social research at the think tank for many, many years, and he's a good friend and comrade. And a very warm welcome to you, Mario. You have 20 to 30 minutes to empower us in this conversation. We look forward to it. Go for it.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for this opportunity, and sorry for my bad English, you will see. Quite stressful times for us at Die Linke, the left in Germany, of course, due to pandemic for everyone, but we also have new party leadership facing 8 elections this year, and 4 of them very crucial for us, including the federal elections, where at the moment everything is possible, so we will see. But let's get to the idea of Connective Party. Well, no part of the plural left, no party, no trade union, no left avant-garde can claim any leadership role anymore. At the same time, however, it should be avoided that plurality turns into division. This is also the idea behind Mimo Porcaro's concept of the Partito Connectivo, the connective party, which he developed with us at our institute. Mimo was one of the most important intellectuals of Rifondazione Comunista in the late 1990s. If you remember, the party was the hope for a new left in Europe with Fausto Bertinotti as their general secretary. And the concept should overcome the idea of the classical mass party. The Connective Party was designed as a kind of union of different political subjects in forms that do not want to eliminate the existing differences, but rather organize around them in a Gramscian sense as a societal party of a new type, let's call it. In a nutshell, decades of neoliberal reorganization of social relations resulted in a kind of unmaking of the working class, its fragmentation, creating new segments of class, a growing precariat and unsecure life and working conditions, a cybertariat, highly educated and trained, but also very often in precarious conditions, and of course, the old segments of the shrinking industrial working class. So with the ongoing transnationalization, organized labor was put into the defensive, you all know that, and even before the collapse of socialism in the East. So the base for the old social democratic as well as radical left parties was shrinking, or at least rapidly changing. On the other hand, there was never a lack of social mobilization from the left. There were always lots of different new movements and organization, but often divided. The subaltern lacked some kind of common language or an understanding of common interests. We were confronted with a multitude of political movements and demands that could not be translated into one another. So the so-called multitude was just an expression of that. With the high time of ultra-globalization movement and the formation of Rifondazione after the transformation of the old PGE into a sad social democratic party, a new alliance together with the communist unions was created, representing the new plurality, a mosaic left, or however you call it. But the ties were too weak at the time, superficial, not really organized, just a discourse, but there was no common strategic project. Furthermore, even if it is possible to involve lots and lots of activists and union staff, it would be wrong to consider this as an expression of the population. They are a small part of the population with the time and the resources for political engagement, but they are not representing the class really anymore. So the party also needs to reach out to groups often difficult to, or even impossible to reach, which have turned away from politics for good reason. So anchoring in and connecting with the active parts of the population, as well as all sorts of left organization and movement, is not enough if you're not anchored in the popular classes anymore. You all know that, but sometimes it's important to remember this. And when a new Berlusconi government absolutely had to be prevented, Rifondazione joined a center-left coalition government. but the ties between the mosaic left were very weak, not ready for the overwhelming forces that tear you in different directions, not rooted in the real class action. So the left was unable to implement social reforms, any social reform, or to avert entry into the Iraq war at the time. The result was an almost complete annihilation of any radical left party in Italy since today, or until today, sorry. Or as Porcaro himself put it, a loose network of movements is not enough. The idea that social change consists in the progressive and linear growth of the movement has proven to be wrong. The creation of a counter-hegemonic movement cannot succeed as an additive process or through cooperation between separate organizations on a case-by-case basis. Strategic leadership is required in order to generate qualitative leaps and effective breaks. Otherwise, initiative fizzles out or threatens to drift away in a sectarian manner. However, there is no longer a privileged place of leadership, let alone a leader. It is therefore about a kind of distributed leadership, we call it. Depending on the political situation and strategic necessity, the leadership of the whole subject passes from one part to another, from one part of the movement or union to another, to a party, or even to a left-wing government, and from the government back to the movement, etc. Every transition of the leadership function from one part to another highlights a new point of condensation of struggles, a change in strategy, and a realignment of mobilization. The events in Greece following 2008-9 financial crisis are maybe a good example for this. Countless riots and general strikes were important symbolic actions at the beginning of the crisis, but they quickly exhausted themselves. Leadership shifted from unions to movements, more or less spontaneously. The crucial point came following the occupations of central squares in North Africa and Spain, with the occupation of Syntagma Square in Athens. This is where the rise of Syriza began, because they did manage not to advertise their party with the usual symbols and flag, but instead interfered as individuals in the debates, especially against the attempts of the radical right to infiltrate the squares movement. Syriza provided an infrastructure for the squares, and above all, they listened. They managed to pick up the moods, the passions, and the political messages. Syriza symbolizes a kind of condensation point that translated civil society self-organization and protest into the perspective of the seizure of government power. And beyond the politically activists, for many, they represented the spirit of the protest, not at least in the lower social classes. The party combined this with far-reaching changes in the political structure of its own organization and developed close institutional, even organic connections with the movements. The Solidarity for All network was founded together with the movements in order to network and strengthen solidarity structures across the country. Each MP pays a substantial part of his salary for the Solidarity for All fund. And at least one member of the MP's employees was released to work specifically in the movement, not in the parliament. So there was a very deep connection with the movements. The party was enormously important as an infrastructure for building these structures, but they did not control them. And the movements went beyond protest, engaging in direct self-help, political education, building counter everyday structures. Although one must say, especially Syriza was never much rooted in organized labor, but it reached out to the precarious parts of the class. So the party thus stands for a kind of new type of party that can be best characterized with what we call connective party. We were discussing this with them very often. The different partners of the connective party fulfill different roles and functions, and each partner can become the leader of the entire front. And this alliance treated the social and cultural divisions between and within the subaltern classes as the explicit object of political analysis and strategy formation to overcome this fragmentation. However, Syriza did not succeed later in ensuring this path of impulses also into the party, as it is during the occupation of Syntagma Square. We have not maintained an active relationship with society after the takeover of government. There was hardly any difference in acting to Nea Demokratia or PASOK. This is a summary from former Secretary General Tassos Kouronakis, also a fellow at our institute. Although the indispensable role of social movements and struggles on the left is widely recognized, the widespread notion of a kind of linearly ascending political organizational process dominates. At the beginning, there's protest and movement, then followed by the formation or reorganization of a new left party, which finally competes to win elections, seize power, and implements its policy. Movements have their place, but the notion of conquering power remained old-fashioned, parliament-centered, etatist. So we'll do it for you. But this traditional relation between movements and governments is no longer suitable, if it was at any time. Instead, it should be clear that the takeover of institutional power is not the moment to replace the momentum of movements. With taking the government, the movements and the labor actions would have to be increased even more. Self-organization in all areas has to be strengthened. New connective practices between the different functions of a government, of a party, of movements and self-organization would have to be developed instead of acting on behalf of the movements and the voters or calling on the movement on a case by case in order to mobilize for the government, as this was the case in Greece. Repeated mobilization from case to case without a real participation leads to a disappointment, to distancing, to withdrawal and division. And this was the case after the referendum of the Jochi. So this concrete attempt of the Connective Party has failed, of course, due to the overwhelming power of the Troika, but also due to strategic failure. A short look at Spain. The rather old-fashioned understanding of the relation between movements and party was also a center of Podemos in Spain, although it has the idea of being something completely new. In fact, Podemos understood its role simply as a movement party, confusing the two different functions and logics. Or they say that they are a kind of instrument for active translation of movements into institutional politics. And they were able to seize the right moment. But there never was an organic connection, but rather a representative one, plus an intelligent use of populist discursive strategies. But once the massive material interventions of the movements and neighborhood organizations weakened, this kind of discursive populism becomes rather empty. The party became disconnected from the base that once had brought the party into being. And it never developed ties with the organized labor or the different regional national movements that are so important in Spain. Once in government, it is unable to implement visible social reforms to put pressure on the dominating social democratic partner. And the pandemic made things even worse. And Pablo Iglesias stepped down last week as a minister to engage in a regional election. The case was different with the municipalism in Spain, most famous by the Barcelona major Ada Colau. The municipalist movement in many cities of Spain was very clear about the need to transform politics as such and to find a new connection between self-organization of the people and a government, opening up the institutions for new forms of participation. I don't have the time to go deeper into that. It's really interesting to learn from that experience with a huge success in the beginning, really changing a lot of things in the city, not only in Barcelona and Madrid especially, and some other places in Spain. But in the end, it lacked an organizational structure, a real party, enough forces to do all the necessary things. And at the same time, it absorbed too many of the activists into institutional politics, weakening the necessary pressure against institutional obstacles from outside. But still, there's a lot to learn. So, well, and Die Linke in Germany. Well, it's one of the most stable radical left parties in Europe, at least. That's something in these times where everything is going up and down. In the beginning, the party was a role model for a kind of mosaic left, of very diverse old and new factions of the left, radical activists, high-rank union members, left social democrats, a unification of East and West. In 2009, we reached nearly 12% of the votes in general elections. At the moment, we have 9.2, and as I said, facing elections in September. Of course, we had our ups and downs and lots of problems, but the party is quite stable. And in the last years, more than 30,000 young people joined the party. At the same time, we lost 25,000 due to age and death, but we have more than 60,000 members in sum and a very active militancy. And we try to learn from these other experiences, not only the ones I've just talked about, also from the attempts in Portugal, of La France Insoumise, of Labour under Corbyn, on the Sanders campaign, etc. We have close connections to all of these, organized a lot of exchange and trainings between the different organizations. Again, in a nutshell, in the last 10 years, we developed the concept of new or connective class politics. The notion of class politics can help. What would be a socialist class perspective in this or that political field? It helps to formulate a clear reference to the opponent, the leading classes above and against the radical right. It can reformulate the social question with a clear profile, precisely class-oriented, and thus separated from the general social democratic talk of social justice. It is new because it tries to free the class question from its fixation on the old, often male-imagined, dominantly industrial working class, and integrate a feminist and ecological class politics into class-conscious anti-racism. At the same time, it can help to profile the latter movements more clearly on the left as well, even antagonistic. It can thus overcome the false opposition between social question and the so-called identity politics. Because feminism, ecology, anti-racism are not just something for the elite, they are class issues, and we have to understand them as class issues and to articulate as such. This differentiates us from, let's say, a neoliberal feminism or progressive feminism, as Nancy Fraser has framed it. And in the process, projects and practices must be developed that reach beyond the usual suspects of activists and reach out to the popular classes, with or without migrant background. It is especially about those formerly less qualified, precarious parts of the class living in disadvantaged neighborhoods who are, as a rule, one can say, they organize themselves less and go less to elections, but when they may vote for the left very often. Here, outreach work is about overcoming exclusions through special segregation, classifications, and even respectability boundaries, doing simple things that seem so hard to do, as ringing their doorbells, going from door to door, listening, engaging in conversation, and initiate a process of self-organization to build leaders out of these groups. These practices are a litmus test of connective class politics, I would say. So the party as such has to become an organizing tool, engaged in everyday material struggles with the popular classes, not just debating good programs, concepts, or working on their media presence. Resources have to be used for systematic training and structures of transformative organizing. And we trained thousands of party and movement activists in transformative organizing methods, in canvassing, in campaigning. We reached out to disadvantaged neighborhoods, developed projects to organize around rent issues, health, or basic social needs. We supported self-organization of refugees and migrants, and we bring them together with the other initiatives trying to form a common campaign. This way, we attracted massively young activists to join the party, as well as people from the lower classes becoming leaders of these initiatives and campaigns. In fact, Die Linke has the highest proportion of workers amongst all parties in Germany, just ahead of the SPD that is far bigger than our party. Die Linke is the only party to have members from the so-called lower classes, and by a large margin. The Green Party is on the opposite side of this in this context. So new class politics can act as a kind of connective antagonism that brings together different groups, different class segments and movements across different issues but with a common orientation and conflict oriented towards concrete opponents without negating the differences between the different parts of the class. These are extremely condensed, the core ideas of the strategy. In concrete, beyond protest, demands are a good program. Demands or good program, it is crucial to identify a few projects that are able to produce what we call exemplary conflicts. Just 2 years ago, we would never have thought that a campaign on the expropriation of big real estate groups in Berlin could be successful. The long and continued strikes, together with a civil society campaign with patients and social initiatives over staffing at the Berlin hospitals, also had an enormous impact. At first against the head of the union, but then labor disputes and alliances at many other clinics all over the country followed, and the union embraced the strategy. It turns out that such conflicts give visibility, inspire, and motivate. They offer the opportunity to concretely connect previously fragmented initiatives and organizations. Campaigns like these can shift the social discourse, expand the scope of possibilities, and decrease the ability to assert other demands as well. For instance, the campaign to expropriate Deutsche Wohnen & Co., that is how the biggest real estate group is called, has not only improved the field of discourse for a rent cap in Berlin, but has also initiated more radical demands in other areas, such as the return of hospitals to the public sector, as well as energy production, mobility, water supply, education, or the question of remunicipalizing of social infrastructure in general. Expropriation and socialization had become fashionable again, even in the industrial sector. We must therefore ask the question, which are the 3 or maybe 4 might be too much, central social questions that are suitable for developing such a conflict that is productive for the left. This should start with everyday needs, aim to immediate improvements for many, and create a dynamic for next steps and further perspectives for radical shifts. This includes disruptive practices such as disobedience, strikes, occupations, blockades, but also referendums. And nearly always the question of ownership. Self-empowerment and the long breath are central to expanding the scope of possibilities, but even on a small scale, you can see that conflicts can be fun in the neighborhood organizations when a campaign is fruitful, connecting with others, and to feel part of something bigger. This organizing from the ground is central to become more. And the rent movement has become a real class movement, multiracial and post-migrant and female, because migrants, women and children are the most affected from rising rents, bad housing conditions, and discrimination on the housing market. In addition, however, these conflicts also radiate a new attractiveness for those who do not want or do not care or cannot become active themselves. They can see, here's someone who's struggling for us, confronting powerful interests in order to achieve something for everyone. This is more than a popular strategy. It is a popular strategy in the Gramscian sense, with organic ties between the different parts of the class, or at least it can be. You can take Berlin as an example of how much left movements and the left party are capable of learning to facilitate an effective division of labor, solidarity-based criticism, and most of all, shared successes. The fact that in the Berlin government coalition between Social Democrats, Greens and Die Linke, there is no large party dominating the other 2 smaller parties anymore, because electoral results for the 3 parties have become much more similar. This really facilitates cooperation at the same level. But moreover, the fact that we picked some concrete conflicts was crucial for the success. For instance, with a harsh 5-year rent cap, house owners, especially the big ones, went frantic, doing media campaigns against us, against a dangerous socialism. But more than 1 million people have direct advantage of this law. People save between 150 euros up to 500 euros every month. This is not only helpful for the lower classes, but also for the middle classes, which have serious problems to pay the rising rents. Was it legal? We really don't know. We just did it. This is part of a rebellious government to test the rules and disobey. Up to that moment, rent law was said to be federal responsibility. But the federal government did not take responsibility. Of course, we worked not only with the movements on this issue, but with specialized legal teams outside of the ministries full of civil servants from Social Democrats and Conservative Party. We could not rely on the administration. And finally, we won the first instances while the rent cap already became reality. Now we expect the judgment from the Federal Constitutional Court. We are optimistic. The conflict not only shaped the relations of power in society, even media campaigns against us did not work. The conflict also shifted relations of power in juridical debates. As I said, state intervention becomes popular again, even amongst lawyers. Never thought about that before. At the moment, we're designing a law to expropriate real estate companies who own more than 3,000 apartments in Berlin. So we're talking about 240,000 apartments to be expropriated. This is also a result from a long-term connection to the movements. The movement is organizing the referendum with hundreds of thousands of signatures ongoing right now. And the left is not only translating this into a law, but thousands of our activists joined the rank of the initiatives, collecting signatures, campaigning, ringing doorbells. It's the same, all the small initiatives in the disadvantaged neighborhoods we started joined the campaign. Our institute is organizing a juridical assessment of how to justify a compensation far, far, far below market value, only a little higher than the purchase price. At the same time, we're removing entire houses from the market one by one, thousands of flats and buildings. The city constructed some 30,000 new apartments and made a plan for another 160,000. So Berlin might become the new Vienna concerning public and cooperative housing. For that to become true, we try to build a city-owned construction company so we don't have to hire the high-priced private monopolies. We have used this strategy to organize popular conflicts together with an active alliance building with civil society initiatives in many different areas, for mobility laws, anti-discrimination laws, healthcare, social provision. Always a long-term cooperation with movements was crucial, even in the legal process, while at the same time mobilizing. And we founded new institutions to open up the administration to civil society and people for real participation and control, and shifting resources to that institutions and from there to the movements. This is a tough struggle within the administration. It's also crucial that the party and the government officials play different roles. The party has to say it pushes for further steps, even if our government officials are restricted by the rules of the coalition. That strengthens their position in negotiations, even if this means conflict with the coalition partners. This produces some tension from time to time within Die Linke, but we developed a kind of supervision and constant exchange with the movements to overcome these tensions. Ciudades rebeldes is the Spanish terms we adopted for our practice. So at the federal level too, we should clearly state our strategic goal, not simply a red-red-green coalition, because it's arithmetically possible, or opposition because government is useless anyway. No, rather, Die Linke should stand for a decidedly left government that can count on a strong civil society to be its critical partner. A minority government is also conceivable, since this can sometimes be advantage for the left. See Portugal's first socialist government in close cooperation with the radical left parties. We studied that also very closely. The second term did not work out, I would say. So either way, we can no longer afford to only make small corrections. We join a government only when a change of direction is possible. That is the prerequisite for an enduring politics of hope. We have already defined a number of central projects, minimum conditions for a government that also stir up productive conflicts and create visibility. Projects we will organize either in opposition or in government. The latter is unlikely, but not impossible, given the fading position of the conservatives. I don't know if you see what's happening to the conservatives in Germany, just crashing. But without such a mobilized party, without the commitment of initiatives and social movements, any left government will not accomplish much and will be unable to hold out in the long term. So opposing forces within the society are too strong if we are not really with a common strategic process project and the conflict we all fight for. So organizing in conflict or organizing popular class conflicts, if you want it as a summary in a slogan, this might be the one. Thanks.
Thank you, Mario. That was excellent.